What if everything you were told about the origins of civilization was a carefully constructed omission? Long before the rise of the Mediterranean empires we study today, the vast expanse of North Africa was not a desolate wasteland of sand, but a vibrant, emerald paradise teeming with life and innovation. This is the story of the lost giants, the architects of the Nile, and the seafaring masters of Carthage who once challenged the very foundations of the world's greatest powers. 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was a Garden of Eden, filled with sprawling lakes and lush grasslands. Recent archaeological discoveries reveal that the ancestors of the great pharaohs did not arrive from distant lands, they emerged from the heart of the African continent itself. These early pioneers developed complex social structures and celestial calendars long before the first stone was laid at Giza, proving that the roots of human genius are deeply embedded in the ancient soil of Africa. As the Sahara began to dry, these populations migrated toward the only reliable source of water, the Nile River. This migration was not a random movement but a strategic relocation of knowledge, technology, and culture. Here, in the fertile valley, they laid the groundwork for what would become the most enduring civilization in human history. They brought with them the concept of divine kinship and the spiritual connection to the land that would define the Egyptian identity for millennia. The early dynastic period of Egypt was a purely African phenomenon. King Nama, the unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt, was a leader whose roots stretched deep into the southern lands of Nubia. His victory marked the birth of a unified state that harnessed the power of the Nile to build monuments that still defy logic today. This was a society of dark-skinned visionaries who mastered mathematics, astronomy, and medicine while the rest of the world remained in darkness. During the Old Kingdom, the construction of the pyramids reached its zenith. These were not the works of slaves, but the coordinated effort of a highly organized African workforce. The precision of the Great Pyramid reflects a deep understanding of the cosmos, aligned with the stars that these ancient people had studied for generations. Every stone laid was a testament to the collective will of a nation that viewed their monarch as a literal bridge between the heavens and the earth. By the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's influence expanded southward, deepening its ties with the Kingdom of Kush. This was a period of cultural exchange and occasional conflict, but always rooted in a shared African heritage. The borders were fluid, and the exchange of ideas regarding metallurgy, pottery, and governance created a regional powerhouse. It was during this era that the foundations were laid for a southern resurgence that would eventually change the course of Egyptian history in the centuries to follow. The new kingdom saw Egypt become an imperial superpower, led by legendary figures who dominated the Near East. Figures like Thutmose III and Amenhotep were not just rulers, they were African conquerors who established an empire stretching from the Euphrates to the Fourth Cataract. Their courts were centers of immense wealth, filled with gold from the south and exotic goods from the north, showcasing the undeniable prosperity of a continent that was the envy of all its neighbors. To the south of Egypt lay the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization often overshadowed but equally magnificent. Centered around the city of Kama, the Kushites were masters of archery and livestock. Their culture was distinct yet complementary to Egypt, featuring massive circular burial mounds and intricate gold jewelry. As Egypt faced internal decline, the Kushite kings watched from the south, preparing to reclaim the throne of their ancestors and restore the purity of the ancient African traditions they held dear. In the 8th century BC, the Black Pharaohs of the 25th dynasty rose to power. King Pi marched north and conquered Egypt, not to destroy it, but to save it from foreign influence. His successor, Taharqa, became one of the most powerful rulers in the ancient world, building monuments from the heart of Sudan to the Mediterranean coast. For a glorious century, a unified African empire stood as the ultimate bulwark against the encroaching armies of the Assyrians and Persians. While Egypt and Kush flourished in the east, a different kind of power was brewing in the west. The indigenous Berbers, the original inhabitants of North Africa, had long mastered the harsh desert environment. They were a diverse group of tribes, skilled in desert survival and long-distance trade. Their knowledge of the hidden oases and secret paths through the shifting sands made them the indispensable gatekeepers of the continent's vast interior and its unimaginable wealth in gold and salt. Around 800 years before the Common Era, a new power emerged on the northern shores. The Phoenicians, legendary masters of the sea, established the mighty city of Carthage. This was not merely a foreign outpost, but a melting pot where West Asian maritime skill fused with indigenous African resources and labor. Together, they built a commercial empire that spanned the known world, creating a maritime superpower that would eventually threaten the hegemony of Rome for several centuries to come. Carthage became the jewel of the Mediterranean. Its harbor, the Carthage, was a marvel of ancient engineering, capable of housing hundreds of warships in a circular, protected basin. The city's wealth was built on a vast trade network that reached as far as the British Isles and deep into the Gulf of Guinea. The Carthaginians were not just merchants, they were explorers who pushed the boundaries of the known world, driven by an insatiable African spirit of discovery. The architecture of Carthage was a testament to its grandeur. Rising high on the Basser Hill, the city featured multi-story apartment buildings, sophisticated sewage systems, and grand temples dedicated to Tanit and Borhamen. The streets were a cacophony of languages and cultures, where African ivory and gold were exchanged for Mediterranean wine and oil. This urban masterpiece was the heart of an empire that understood that true power lay in the control of the seas and the trade routes. One of the most daring feats of Carthaginian exploration was the voyage of Hanno the Navigator. Leading a fleet of 60 ships, Hanno sailed past the Pillars of Hercules and down the West African coast. He encountered smoking volcanoes and strange creatures, documenting his journey on the shores of modern-day Sierra Leone or Cameroon. This expedition highlights the advanced navigational skills of North Africans, who were charting the Atlantic long before the Europeans even dreamed of such a daring voyage. The relationship between Carthage and the indigenous Numidian tribes was complex and vital. The Numidians were world-renowned for their cavalry, riding small, fast horses without saddles or bridles. They were the elite strike force of the Carthaginian army, providing the mobility and speed necessary to dominate land battles. These African horsemen were not just mercenaries, they were the backbone of North African resistance against foreign encroachment, led by kings who were as diplomatically shrewd as they were brave. As Carthage grew in power, it inevitably clashed with the rising city-state of Rome. The Punic Wars were not just a struggle for territory, they were a fight for the soul of the Mediterranean. The first conflict focused on the strategic island of Sicily, testing the naval limits of both powers. Despite Rome's eventual victory, the war only served to sharpen the resolve of the Carthaginian generals, who realized that the survival of their African empire required a more radical strategy. Enter Hannibal Barca, arguably the greatest military strategist in history. Born into a family of warriors, Hannibal swore an eternal oath of enmity against Rome. He did not wait for the Romans to bring the war to Africa, instead, he launched a daring invasion of Italy. His army was a diverse coalition of Africans, Iberians, and Gauls, united by his charismatic leadership and tactical genius. Hannibal's presence in Italy for 15 years would become Rome's greatest nightmare. The most famous episode of Hannibal's campaign was his crossing of the Alps. Leading tens of thousands of troops and dozens of African war elephants through the treacherous, snow-covered peaks, he achieved the impossible. The sight of these giant African beasts descending upon the Italian plains struck terror into the hearts of the Roman legions. It was a feat of endurance and logistics that proved the sheer will of an African leader determined to dismantle the Roman war machine. Despite his brilliant victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, Hannibal was eventually forced back to Africa. At the Battle of Zama, he faced the Roman general Scipio. The defeat marked the end of Carthage's status as a superpower, but it did not erase its legacy. The resilience of the North African people continued as they transitioned into a new era of Roman occupation, where they would become the essential granary of the empire and a center of early Christian thought. Roman North Africa was far from a quiet colony. It became one of the most prosperous regions of the Roman world, producing vast quantities of grain, olive oil, and wine. Cities like Tamegodi and Leptis Magna featured grand theaters, public baths, and triumphal arches that rivaled Rome itself. The people who lived there were a sophisticated blend of Punic, Berber, and Roman cultures, proving that North Africa remained a dynamic engine of civilization even under the rule of an outside power. In the deep interior, the Garamantes developed an extraordinary civilization. They mastered the art of underground irrigation, known as fogueira, allowing them to farm the hyper-arid desert. This subterranean network supported large urban centers and a thriving trade in salt and precious stones. Their ability to thrive where others perished is a testament to the ingenuity of African engineers who understood how to harness the hidden resources of the earth to sustain a sophisticated society in the heart of the Sahara. The cultural legacy of ancient North Africa is profound. From the philosophical writings of Saint Augustine to the architectural innovations that would later influence the Islamic world, the region was a crucible of intellectual thought. The blending of Egyptian spiritualism, Punic commercialism, and Berber resilience created a unique identity that persisted despite numerous invasions. This was a land that never truly lost its African soul, even as it served as a crossroads for the greatest empires of the ancient world. For too long, the history of North Africa has been separated from the rest of the continent, portrayed as something detached from its African roots. But the reality is that the pharaohs, the Carthaginian explorers, and the Numidian kings were all part of a vast, interconnected African story. By reclaiming this history, we honor the dark-skinned ancestors who built the pyramids, navigated the Atlantic, and challenged the might of Rome, ensuring their names are never forgotten in the sands of time. Today, the ruins of Carthage and the pyramids of Meroe stand as silent witnesses to a glorious past. They remind us that Africa's contribution to humanity is not limited to one region or one era. The spirit of innovation, trade, and resistance that defined ancient North Africa continues to pulse through the continent today. As we look back at these giants of history, we find the inspiration to build a future that is just as magnificent, anchored in the eternal strength of Africa.